Hello, friends. I'm Rosie Acosta, your host and guide on this journey to self-discovery and radical love. I've walked a path filled with challenges. Growing up in East LA during the '92 LA riots, it left me searching for meaning, for mentors, for a way to truly understand the purpose of life. But you know what I found? The power of conversation. So I decided to create a space where we can share these conversations with you, our community. And that's how the Radically Loved podcast was born. Join me as we dive into topics like mindfulness, spirituality, self-love, and the keys to overall healthy living. I'm joined by my dear friend, fellow author, producer, and teacher, Tessa Tovar.
Hi, I'm Tessa, and I'm grateful to be part of this community because it teaches me so much about what it means to be human. Ever since I was a little one, I was always asking the deeper questions in life. Why are we here? What happens when we are gone? What is the purpose of life? I love this show because I get to ask the questions that cut right to the meaning of life. I've learned that no matter how much we want the path to be clear, it never is. And that is actually part of the beauty that creates a radically loved life.
Please do us a favor, share the episodes you love with your friends, and leave us a review. Together, we'll learn how to create a life that's truly, deeply, radically loved. Let's begin. Jeff, I'm so excited to have you back on the show.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. You are the best. And now I'm also with Tessa, which is an extra layer on the cake.
Jeff, your background, it makes me you look like you're in a sauna. It's inspiring me to go do a little
Oh my God, wait, tell Tessa about that.
Well, candidly, yeah, I just was in a sauna, but it's part of my morning protocol, which you might hear about. I briefly recorded a very ill-fated podcast called The Schwitz, which was me and my commune co-founder, Jake Laub, recounting Old Testament stories in the sauna, but with sort of an irreverent flair. And he is more versed in the Old Testament than I am, though, I acquainted myself with some of the more famous parables. Anyways, we made it through about 2 episodes, and then it got too hot. Sorry.
Did your equipment melt? How does your equipment deal with that?
Well, that was actually a really effective way of keeping the episode short. We only had about 20 minutes before everything began to malfunction, including our brains. And obviously video was a little tough there. But listen, I'm still down for the Schwitz. If you guys ever want to do rekindle, so to speak, the Schwitz, I'm in. We could give it a try.
I loved it. I thought it was really such a brilliant idea. And I love him. We worked, right? I think me and Jacob worked together. I don't remember what one of the many content pieces it was that we worked on together, but yeah, I loved the idea. I think you hadn't started recording when I heard about it, but then you did. And then I was sad when you stopped because I really liked it.
That 1 week of glory lives in infamy. We actually do look upon that time with a wistful nostalgia. And every once in a while, we get revved up to give it another whirl, and then our neo-mammalian brain comes into play and be like, that's not rational.
Oh my
goodness. That's not reasonable. That's not a reasonable thing to be doing if you're a revered member of society like we are. So anyhow, someday I'm in. Let's do it.
Maybe the next episode we'll do in the sauna. We'll just see how it works. We'll work it out. Okay, Jeff, the last time when we chatted, which I want to say, we've talked since 2 years ago, but I think the last time we chatted was when I was on your podcast, on the Commune podcast, when my book came out, and you were going through some health things.
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. as well, our first point of intersection must have been wanderlust, right?
Yes.
I'm sure you came and taught on numerous occasions, and so I was running a yoga festival, if you will, for like 10 years, and despite sort of devoting my entire life to health and wellness, I found myself kind of in a pit of chronic disease and a whole bunch of other symptoms that honestly are really not that extraordinary. It's only interesting insofar that they are so incredibly ordinary that we've essentially normalized them across society. So, all the typical suspects like brain fog, chronic fatigue. I was a wicked insomniac. I would go for like weeks, without sleeping. And of course, that spilled over into all of these other elements of my life. I became so irritable. I could not focus or concentrate really on anything. I think in the year of 2017, I read a total of 0 books. Just simply because I could not focus or concentrate. And then, there were the more, I sort of like the insults to my vanity. And I'm not above a little bit of vanity, so I started to like grow these little brown tags in my armpits, like perhaps TMI.
No, we love TMI, Jeff. We're here.
Okay,
we're here for all of it. Give it to us.
Then it's about to get worse. And then of course, like I had, the typical like dad bod, like little like inner tube layer around the middle, like little visceral adiposity. And then kind of the worst were like these fleshy protuberances on my breast, often known as the man boobs, more clinically known as gynecomastia for those who care about clinical delineations. And it was really just an awful time in my life. And of course, these physiological presentations bled into my psychological state, and I was going through kind of vicious cycles of depression and all of this. So, but again, almost everything that I just bullet pointed are so prosaic, really, and kind of anodyne in our world. It's like you can almost just chalk them up to like, oh, I just had a bad day. But as I learned after now interviewing like 450 doctors or so, it's like these presentations that are so common in modern life are barely upstream from all of the kind of worst chronic diseases, so heart disease and dementia and diabetes. And that was a real cold water over my head, which at a point where I wasn't choosing to put cold water over my head, was waking up and actually finding out that I had diabetes. I didn't really wake up and find out. I put this little disc on my triceps, which is called a continuous glucose monitor, which is a little dashboard into one's blood glucose moment to moment. And as I peered into the app, much to my great chagrin, my fasting blood glucose was like 100 milligrams per deciliter. What does that mean? 125 milligrams per deciliter, which is basically diabetic, pre-diabetic, right on the edge. And I was like, no, that can't be right. But indeed, it was right. And I scurried off to my PCP. Of course, I'd canceled probably every, annual visit in recent memory, as many of us do. And she was kind enough to do my hemoglobin A1C levels, and it came back at 6.7%, which is like in the lower end of the diabetic range. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm the wanderlust guy. Like, I'm the yoga guy. Like, I pay my taxes. I got 3 daughters. I'm like an upstanding member of society. What's going on? I'm not like the diabetic guy. And then, that propelled me on my path to sort of untangle my physiology and understand like why we are sick as a culture. And fortunately, I had a lot of access to a lot of brilliant people within the wellness space and doctors. And over the last 2 or 3 years, essentially, I've put myself through some form of layman's medical school and made some significant transformations in my life.
Wow. First of all, I've got a million questions, and I'm sure Tessa does too.
Yeah.
So you're going to have
Yes,
to be
I do.
answering double time
All
now.
right, let's go.
But the first thing is just to even take it back to the symptoms that you were getting while you were running these big festivals and just doing all this stuff in your personal life. Like when you started to notice things were kind of awry little by little, this happens so much in our society. We kind of wait until whatever the thing is rears its ugly head for us to pay attention. So for you now, having the knowledge that you have now, looking back, at what point now do you think that you should have not canceled a doctor's appointment?
Yeah, probably pretty early on. Hemingway actually has a great quote about going bankrupt. There's a good metaphor there to be made with chronic disease is you go bankrupt very, very gradually and then very suddenly. And that is also true for finding out that you have diabetes, because you don't just wake up with it like someone gave you an ugly Christmas sweater.
Does it run in your family?
No, it doesn't. It was just, and so this is the nature of these chronic diseases, whether it's, Alzheimer's, dementia, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, all sorts of other delicious diseases. They're incredibly progressive. They're just snail-like. They're the tortoise that outruns the hare in the long term. And so they take hold kind of sinisterly and, through just kind of chipping away like, oh, I didn't sleep this week. And, oh, I went out and drank too much that week. And, oh, I ate a little bit too much ultra-processed foods this year. And then stress got me down and I overworked a little bit too much. And there was too much pressure. And I didn't make the budget. And, oh, my God, I failed my kids. And I didn't make it to the dance comp on time. And now they're mad at me. Like just whatever. You stack these things up like a fucking bricklayer. And over time, so this is more, I'll get a little more clinical here, is like I was doing all of the things that essentially make me insulin resistant. So when you live within constant toxic, bad distress, the way so many of us live, that impacts, it starts this cascade, this endocrine cascade in your body. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the sort of the HPA axis and the cortisol cascade. That will raise blood glucose levels, as it should, because adaptively on the Serengeti, you want glucose to go to your extremities so you can flight or fly. But over time, if that's chronic, like it is in so many people in the modern day, you have chronically high glucose levels. What happens when you have chronically high glucose levels? Your pancreas goes into overdrive to produce this marvelous little peptide hormone known as insulin, which is sort of like the Uber driver for glucose, and it takes it to the cell for energy production. But what I learned, which is a great lesson, one that I knew more intimately with caffeine and alcohol, which was that the excess of any molecule in your body will create a resistance to itself. So I'll just kind of say that again, because you can actually apply that to you can apply that to almost anything in life. The excess of any one molecule in the human body creates a resistance to itself. So the prevalence of insulin in my bloodstream, eventually my cells said no more and created a resistance to that insulin. And at that juncture, you're basically just an imp's breath from diabetes. And that's where I was. And then, but, here's the good news is if you identify it, before the river becomes completely polluted, you can reverse it. But the better news, like the gospel here, is that everyone should be paying attention to how they live their life early in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and not just in their 50s, because this is when, these kinds of pathologies take hold and start to develop. And that's why they're known as progressive. So I should have been on top of this stuff way, way earlier in my life. But fortunately, the window opened when it did. And I was able to learn about and adopt a whole bunch of different lifestyle protocols to completely reverse it and to turn my life around.
Wow. What a journey, Jeff. I think, okay, yes, Rosie's right. I have a million questions. And I love this subject. I think I love this subject.
It's apropos.
Yeah. Well, because, okay, so I heard you say caffeine and alcohol. And I think, okay, those are two things I really enjoy in my life. I love my coffee in the morning. I have my shot of espresso in the morning, maybe 2, maybe 3 sometimes, if I'm going to be honest and out myself. And then in the evening, I love my glass of red wine. And okay, so excess of any molecule will create resistance to itself. So how do we know we're in excess? Were there kind of to piggyback on Rosie's first question, if you look back in your earlier life, were there warning bells of when you were, and I don't know if maybe it wasn't just caffeine and alcohol, maybe there were other indications or other things you were consuming on a daily basis in excess. I would love to hear what those were. But were there any sort of little warning bells looking back early on that you would have wish you would have paid attention to?
Yeah. So I use alcohol and caffeine just because they're so prevalent and normalized in our society, really. And we know by dint of our own experience with those chemicals that we create a tolerance to them, right? So it's like if you are off coffee for 3 months and then you go and get a venti, you're buzzed out of your mind, right? Because, you've basically, your tolerance for that particular chemical, the way that it essentially blocks the adenosine receptors, around your cells is so potent that basically you just get this frantic, frenzied energy. But of course, if you have, if you're having 4 or 5 cups of coffee per day, that first cup or second cup is not going to have, the same impact, right? So, and we know that also with my daughter, who has probably perfected the keg stand at this juncture, is has a bigger tolerance for alcohol than I do. So, and then, really the same thing applies.
I love Phoebe so much. I love her so much.
Yeah. And I say that as if to compliment her. So, just because she maintains great balance and shoulder strength while also guzzling a beer. No, but so I just make that metaphor because that is also true with molecules like insulin or with different neurotransmitters like dopamine, for example. That's a famous Jekyll and Hyde neurotransmitter. So, yeah, I think it is super bio-individual in terms of what is excess. But I generally think we know by the product of our own experience. So yes, you could certainly measure, levels of caffeine in the body if you wanted to. But I think more are you feeling these kind of peaks and valleys of frantic energy and then major, major crashes? And this really points to, I think, one of the greatest learnings that I had over the last few years is that sort of health, the signature of health is balance. And it's avoiding those massive peaks and valleys. And, the body is really very, very engineered to foster balance or equilibrium. I mean, in a human organism, it's known as homeostasis, but we can think about it in a whole variety of different ways. Like when we're emotionally regulated, for example, we can sustain some criticism and some insult, right? And then we might get, moved by it for a moment, but then we come back to center, right? We're centered, we're balanced, we have equipoise, This is very, very true in physiology. So it's amazing, like if we even just hover over glucose levels for a moment, the body, the liver, like titrates just like with incredible precision to keep a certain amount of glucose in your bloodstream because it just wants to maintain that little Goldilocks zone so you have enough energy, but not too much blood sugar, right? Until you fuck it up, until essentially modern culture, elbows its way in there, I would say his way in there, and yangs you to high heaven, essentially with refined sugars, with endless feeding cycles, with temperature neutrality, with, sedentary living, with pressure, with work, with toxic stress, et cetera. It disrupts that balance. There's all of these, like the acid pH balance in the body, it's hard to fuck that up. The body is so engineered to maintain about like 7.4% alkalinity in the body. You can, eat cruciferous vegetables all day. You're really not going to change that because the body is so engineered for the warm porridge, for the Goldilocks zone. The same with temperature regulation. It's like we're not always at 98.6. We actually hover kind of 2 degrees kind of around that. But if you get yourself into an ice bath, for example, which is an incredibly adaptive practice for reasons that I can unpack, but your body will automatically go into this thermoregulation process of bringing your core body temperature back up into that Goldilocks zone. So, this is the key to health. The key to health is fostering balance. That's true in economics, that's true in agriculture and ecology, that's true in politics, although we don't see any of that in power politics anymore, is always finding the middle way. It's always finding the middle path. It's always pushing towards homeostasis. And I think what I discovered through interviewing, doctor after doctor after doctor, the source of disease is actually imbalance. Mm-hmm. So an imbalance comes from, honestly, a lot of the engineering for convenience and comfort and chronic ease. And so I kind of sat on this kind of relatively glib, turn of phrase, which is that like chronic dis-ease is really the result of chronic ease, that essentially culture has tried to engineer so much convenience into our life that it's actually hijacked our biology. And like what I was suffering from, diabetes, but what so many people are suffering from is actually not like these chronic diseases, they're not like bugs in the system, actually. They are the normal and expected results of our Paleolithic genome simply trying to cope with our culture, with our lifestyle, with the way we live. And that was a big, Satori moment for me.
Do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? Because 4 out of 5 Americans aren't. And that's a big problem because magnesium is involved in more than 300 biochemical reactions in your body. Today, I want to talk to you about the most common signs to look for that could indicate you're magnesium deficient. Listen carefully to the end because there's a special offer happening and this could be exactly what you need. Okay, here we go. Are you irritable or anxious? Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you experience muscle cramps or twitches? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you sometimes constipated? There are dozens of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, so these are just a few of the most common ones. Now, here's what most people don't know. Taking just any magnesium supplement won't solve your problem because most supplements use the cheapest kinds that your body can't use or absorb. That's why I exclusively recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. It's the only full-spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. All Bioptimizer supplements are best in class. If for some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund, no questions asked. They are so confident that they offer 365-day money back guarantee. Just go to www.bioptimizers.com/radically loved. Use the promo code radicallyloved10. You can get gifts with your purchase. You can get 2 travel-sized bottles of Magnesium Breakthrough. Act fast. This is a limited time offer. Go to bioptimizers.com/radically loved and use the promo code radicallyloved10.
Yeah, I love that, because I was just going to ask, you talked about some of the, intrinsic things that happen during this stress process. I'm curious, all the extrinsic factors that come in, like social media, the news, the economy, our own, stress of not maybe doing something that we love, how all of those things also play a role in that constant high cortisol vicious cycle, right? Like the things that we are constantly exposed to that create a lot of that imbalance. It's so interesting how you were saying the thing about ease and the dis-ease, right? So our ease, I'm thinking it's easy for me to work. I sit on my, chair all day long, and I get my food delivered, and I just sit on the couch all day and everything comes to me. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to quote unquote stress myself to go and walk down the street. I could just bring whatever's down the street to myself. I don't have to do anything. So in an effort to create ease, we are creating more dis-ease by not putting ourselves through that stress, right? So I don't know if you're kind of picking up what I'm putting down here, because you're talking about ice baths, and I'm just like, damn, talk about something that really creates that initial jarring for the body and how good it is, right? So I don't know if there's something in there that you want to, get into or not, but
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
100%. No, I mean, you put your thumb right on it. I mean, let alone what you just described, essentially creating an epidemic of loneliness. That's another artifact of this idea that we actually don't really need to do anything or leave our house. But we evolved, over millions of years, if you include our hominid ancestors, but even over hundreds of thousands of years, if you're just talking about Homo sapiens. And we evolved in relation to our environment. You cannot separate the function and behavior of a human from the function and behavior of their environment. And this happened over unimaginable swaths of time, right? So we actually evolved with periods of extreme hardship and, what I now call sort of good stress. Like there were significant periods of food scarcity, right? So, and our bodies essentially evolved and adapted to be fat. Actually, it was adaptive to be fat, not great on Instagram, but really, really helpful for tens of thousands of years in the late summer and in the early fall on the savanna of East Africa. We are actually meant to be a little fat in the fall because the scarcity of winter's fallow, or whatever you want to call it, is around the corner. And so, but now there's no winter's fallow. I mean, yeah, of course there's food scarcity in some parts of the world, so I don't want to discount that. But overwhelmingly, like you just said, I can it's December, I can just order up a pineapple now, 24/7, 365 days a year, in and out of season, whatever. Essentially, there is no scarcity, there's no fallow. And so, we just consume all the time. And then we scratch our heads and we say, oh, I wonder why there's 45% obesity. Well, that's actually that's the way we've evolved to be, because all fat is it's easy to villainize it, kind of whatever, in our cultural ridiculousness of some attainable form of, beauty that we're chasing all the time. But really what it is, it's just warehoused energy. That's it. It's it is a repository of energy when energy is not around. Old fat Jeff wins in a famine. And in fact, I used to think it's my ancestors basically starved so I could be fat, whatever. I have the thrifty gene or whatever. But So that is just like one, example, but you look at like temperature neutrality, for example. Like I actually have a thermostat in my brain. It's called my hypothalamus. It regulates my temperature with unbelievable precision. But now, like I don't use that. I use the digital one. That's like, I have a little, this is it. I actually have a little thing. I can control it. I don't even have to get up. Um, so what does that actually mean? So I can always be snuggly. I can be snuggly with like 72. Oh, not 71, 72, and if it goes to 71, it knows. Like, and you just think of like how that undermines human resilience. We were evolved for great fluctuations in temperature. And in response or in relation to those fluctuations, we actually we generated this sort of miraculous adaptive human body that would actually with the right amount of stress, essentially it's always the dose makes the poison, right? So, but the right amount of cold, less of hypothermia, would actually stimulate all of these incredible processes in the body. It raised metabolic rate, it raised dopamine levels, and it, of course, like created psychological resilience and all of these other kind of positive benefits. And the same thing for heat. So there, and you can just go down the line with these things. We had to move our bodies in Paleolithic times, right? There was no choice. So, we were all in relatively good cardiovascular shape. We didn't need an Equinox membership to do our resistance training. It was just like, Tessa, will you go get the wood and I'll do the hunting, and Rosie will run over there and get the water, and like, we'll be good. And then of course, just even that, like we counted on each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, it was a communal experience. And I think just going back to what you said about the epidemic of loneliness and how, I'm sure there are so many connections that you can make between chronic disease and loneliness, even, like I think that part of what we're missing so much is that tribal aspect of everybody having a job to do. It's like you go to an ashram, everybody's required to have a job. Like you can't just go and, oh, it's a free, like you don't have to pay anything. It's like, no, it's not free. You have to put work in. You have to either wash the dishes or clean up or go, get water, like do whatever it is that you need to do in order to be a part of the communal process. And yeah, to your point, we don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. It's like even walking. We're in LA and, I grew up here. Nobody walks in LA. There was a literal song about it, and it's such a difficult thing to, even drive home now because so many of us can't even be on a walk without being on the phone. I live right by a high school. And the minute I go, I see these high school kids come out. They're not even looking. They're just, everybody's on their phones. They're not even engaging with each other. It's like everybody's just in their own little siloed lives. And, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to be said about how those two things correlate.
100%. We've totally twisted the whole idea of survival of the fittest. That like, that sort of like the chest thumping, despotic muscle man is somehow more evolutionarily adapted for survival. It's actually just completely the other way around. It's like actually community is adaptive. And that's why you look at like communities, and many of them that are kind of spiritual, and despite like, the belief in some like bearded invisible patriarch with a moral abacus or something, like they tend to like, and like the delusion of that in my mind, they tend to actually live longer because they're accountable to each other. And and not only that, but there's this whole emerging field of sociogenomics, right? So that like just like epigenetics, basically, that our genes express differently in relation to our environment. And part of our environment, or our exposome, if you will, is our social relationships. And that, right now there's emerging evidence that our genes will express themselves differently. They will methylate and hypermethylate differently. They'll turn on and off in relation to our social connections. And so if you actually have a bounty of social connections and you feel full in that part of your life, it is more likely that your genes are going to express themselves adaptively. I mean, it's, pretty wild. But again, now we live in this era where we've completely sanctified the individual. It's either you're like Kim Kardashian or bust,
Right.
and bust in that case. But sorry, but but you know what I'm saying is like, we live alone. We're completely atomized. We're in these tiny echo chambers. We order Amazon, and that's it. And we think that that's okay.
Yeah.
But then we're lonely. I mean, there's this study that can't remember her name. She's got a great name. It's like Julia Hodstead Untz or something like that. That's not quite it, but someone that you can trust, a name you can trust, out of BYU, the Mormon establishment. But anyways, nevertheless, they produced a study that showed that being lonely is a greater risk for all-cause mortality than smoking 16 cigarettes a day.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is start smoking cigarettes.
Right? I knew you were gonna say that. I'm like, he's gonna say it. I know he's gonna say that.
I've never said that before.
You know what? You know what the interesting
I retract.
Oh, come on. We're gonna leave that in there just for that.
Look, I've got my lighter right here, so I'm ready.
Strike it up.
Yeah. After this health talk, I just gotta go blow off some steam.
Oh my God, that's like Dr. Ellen Langer. Have you heard? Do you know her? Have you interviewed her?
But it sounds interesting.
She's amazing. She wrote this. She's written several books. She's like the head of the psychology department at Harvard. She is like the mother of mindfulness, and she's in her higher up years. But in interview, I mean, she was just on Rich Roll's podcast, and she was talking about how occasionally she says she might smoke a cigarette. It's just like, but I started laughing because her whole thing is how the mind-body connection affects chronic illness. It's really great. You should check it out. I think you'd really, really like it. I'm a big fan of her work and studies that she's done, and the importance of that. But it's like your mind. I mean, you see these people all the time. I'm not saying that you should smoke. I mean, but it's like, those people that are in their 90s and they're still smoking, and it's like, geez, how are you able to do that, and not have all of the things that go wrong with that?
Right. Well, to Tessa's earlier topic, there's this thing called healthy user bias, right? So, you look at all these people in the blue zones, right? There's the places in the world with the highest prevalence of centenarians, largely concentrated in the Mediterranean, but not only the Mediterranean. There's Costa Rica and Okinawa and even Loma Linda, California. So, they're very typically characterized as like, they have a glass of wine at night, right? So wine must be okay. Well, I think now there's enough evidence to say that even a small amount of alcohol is probably not healthy. It's like a carcinogen and a neurotoxin if you want to look at it just that way. Mm-hmm. But it is also very GABAergic, and it can be a social lubricant for people. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't other social lubricants or that you actually need it to have connection, but it's often used, around in very, very, moderation, around the dinner table in Sardinia or in Icaria. And you have these wonderful, long, community-focused dinners where there's sort of exchange of ideas and laughter and tears and resolved arguments or whatever. And that obviously contributes, to a full life. Mm-hmm. And mostly because, and I bring up healthy user bias because, in that case, a glass of wine, is not, you're doing so many other things right in your life. You're walking, you're eating nutrient-dense food, you're in community, you're in the sun, you're outside, if you have a glass of wine, it seems not to, cut you off at the knees.
Mm.
Now, of course, like if you're living like a completely detached, isolated life, you're eating ultra processed foods, you're drinking and smoking all day, then, there's certainly a case against it. So, this is, yeah. So that's my feeling about, vices. I think like we don't want to eliminate like all petty little peccadillos.
Leave them in there. Leave the little peccadillos in there.
Well,
Come on.
that's kind of the crux of the question that I was trying to get to, is like, hey, Jeff, and I know it's bio-individual, and thank you for calling that out. I think it's helpful to remember, yes, it's bio-individual, and we all have to find, what feeds us, what spikes our blood glucose, what doesn't, what helps us find homeostasis. But it's like those little things that bring me joy and happiness and increase my dopamine, and, maybe wine is the social lubricant. I think the question that I'm trying to get to is, how do we reconcile like our Paleolithic evolutionary past and what our bodies are bio and genetically created for, and how we're living today totally outside of that realm in total ease to our detriment? How do we reconcile those two things and find homeostasis again? And I think about that in terms of what you said about obesity, and like it's healthy, typically evolutionary, to gain weight and fall in winter. What do we do now where we're all trying to keep up with the Kardashians?
Yeah, well, that particular pursuit might not be a profitable one for you specifically. But just in terms of like, let's frame it in the biggest winner, not the biggest loser, okay?
Thank you.
So, well, really, what I have done in my own life is essentially start to self-impose deliberately some of the stressors of my Paleolithic ancestry. And, this, I've kind of, populated a set of protocols or a program that I call Good Stress, which essentially flips like the script on stress from this chronic, bad, detrimental stress to self-imposed, deliberate, short-term, acute stress that actually confers a significant health benefit because we evolved with it. So, okay, so that let's just take them as they come. So like, yeah, we had periods of food paucity. So in our Paleolithic ancestry. So what do? Well, if we really want to balance, growth and repair in the human body, which are essential, then we actually have to self-impose periods of food scarcity. Now, we call that fasting, right? And fasting, of course, is like baked into all of these, old traditions. And again, fasting is very bio-individual, certainly very different for men and for women. But, as I started to adopt like a 16-8 protocol where, I condense all the consumption of food in an 8-hour window, there were all of these incredible physiological benefits from doing that. My body basically started to access its repair pathways. So in the body and in culture in general, there's pretty much like this monotone edict, like grow, like gross domestic product grew 3% this year. Gross Jeff product got much grosser through 3% growth or whatever. But really, you look at all natural systems, and there needs to be, this tenuous like balance between growth and repair. So through fasting, I started to activate, these pathways that are known as like AMPK, which is the autophagy pathway, which is, your body starts to break down senescent cells or dysfunctional proteins into their amino acid building blocks such that they can use those whatever. I'm not going to go into the whole physiology of it, but the point is that there's all, by self-imposing a lot of those stressors, you actually unlock the body's engineering. And I will say with fasting particularly, though, it seems to be good for your microbiome. It seems to be good in terms of, you're generally calorie restricting when you're in a fasting protocol. Of course, you can eat 20 pints of Ben & Jerry's within a very short period of time. And I'm living proof that you can do that. But still, if you're paying attention to eating within an 8-hour window, you're generally restricting calories to some degree, and that's going to be somewhat helpful for weight management, et cetera. But where I found, personally, the biggest attribute for adopting this kind of Paleolithic stress of food scarcity was because I'd committed to it. When I felt that stimulus, when I felt the hunger, and I knew that I couldn't just mindlessly meander over to the cupboard, for a bag of chips, when I knew that wasn't an option for me, I began to be able to examine the actual nature of the stimulus of the hunger. And I found that space between stimulus and response such that I could delineate between what was a biological need and an emotional or psychological desire. I'm like, am I really hungry? Does my body actually need this energy substrate right now? Or am I just bored? Or am I upset? Or am I like in an addictive pattern here or habit or maladaptive habit where, when I'm depressed or feeling a little bit down, I eat? And finding that space, that's where the great liberation lies, according to Viktor Frankl, was so powerful, because then I could apply fasting or the principle of fasting to all of these other elements of my life. And it became more of a mindset than anything else of like, oh, Instagram, like, why am I doing that? Is there a biological need there? Or is there just some sort of psychological desire? Or like someone cut me off in traffic, I'm fucking pissed. Fuck that. No, wait a minute. Really? Is this an emotional desire, or is this a biological need? Oh, my kids did something to piss me off. It became sort of an emotional regulation technique as much as it was useful for fasting for food. And, this is like, I think what sits behind kind of almost every protocol is that mindset of being able to cultivate awareness into your own life, that space between stimulus and response. Certainly for emotional regulation, like someone says, oh, Tessa, you're a jerk, what a nefarious solipsist you are, you're a fucking ne'er-do-well, Rosie, blah, 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 whatever. You might have that initial, that you feel that initial insult, right? But then you actually find that awareness of like, oh no, actually this person is really just displacing their own anger onto me. And instead of like picking up that ember of resentment and like, plotting and brooding over some revenge and getting burned the whole time, I'm not going to pick it up. And so, these are, I think, some of the byproducts of like imposing some of these Paleolithic stressors on your life is that, you just become a person more capable of fostering, centeredness and balance in your own life.
Oh, that's so, everything that you said, I'm just like, I feel like we can have like a 5-hour conversation just on that topic alone. I'm curious now, like where you're at now on your own health journey. You talked about in the beginning, the sort of stigma around chronic disease or chronic illness, how as we grow older, there's this idea like, I don't look like a person that has this said disease, right? So much of that plays into how we can, how do you say, like integrate what's happening, right? Some of us might be like, well, this is not, I don't look like I have diabetes, or I don't look like I'm technically obese, but the calculator is saying I am, that kind of thing, where we can, come to a resolve with our own health and create protocols in our lives that are going to be more sustainable to us. I guess my question was initially about the stigma, but I don't actually want to go that route because I'm looking at the time now and I'm like, fuck, I don't want to ask that question.
Right.
But I think really, I guess, so maybe I'll just say it this way. Now, where you are now on your health journey, learning what you have, talking to, hundreds of doctors at this point, has it been easier for you to make those choices mindfully, like you've been saying, like not picking up the hot coal and wanting to chuck it back at somebody? Have you been able to integrate all of these new protocols in your life in a way that feels good? Like, do you feel more at ease?
Mm. Yeah. So I would just say that well-being or health is not something that you have. It's not a ugly sweater or a pretty one. Um, it's a process, and this is like old. This is like Buddha old. We are impermanent beings. We are just simply a process. We're 7 octillion atoms experiencing 37 billion chemical reactions per second. I am nothing like the man that started this conversation 40 minutes ago. So when you really grok yourself as impermanent, as process, there's something a little bit scary to that, because I feel like Jeff because there's a physical continuity to me. I wake up, I suck in my gut in front of the mirror and be like, oh, there's Jeff. Looks pretty much the same as Jeff was. But of course, we know that that's not true. We get anchored to that sense of continuity, but we're always changing. There is nothing but change. And that's scary for a moment until it actually is very empowering. It gives you a lot of agency because well-being is actually a process. Being healthy is a process. And you can be ailing and moving towards disease, or you can be healing and moving towards wholeness. And every day, it seems like the only little bit of free will that I have is where I focus my time and attention. And you can focus it such that you're healing. And unfortunately, that's where I focus most of my attention these days. And we hear a lot about downward spirals in health, and they certainly exist. But there is such a thing as an upward spiral, and I got to sort of reap that experience of like watching my whole physiology and psychology change very, very quickly and experience an upward spiral. That being said, I'll go out, probably with Tessa in the next 3 weeks and like do some tequila shots. And like, I'll wake up the next morning and I'll be moving slightly in the other direction. And I'll be like, Tessa, it was nice to hang out with you, but I'm not going to hang out with you for another month because, I need to take agency over the trajectory of my life. And that's the good news. That's the gospel, right?
Yeah.
These conditions that we've accepted as normal are actually not normal at all. And, the body is really dying to heal. And, we just have to swim with the river's current in many ways. We just have to realign with our own engineering. And to do that, you actually have to, instill a bit of discomfort in your own life. And you have to get comfortable with that discomfort. But the good news is like doing hard things makes doing other hard things easier. And that's true, in your own physiology. I mean, we know like the simplest form of that is like you overload a muscle in your biceps, the microfibers tear, you give it some rest, they heal, and you hypertrophize, you grow a bigger muscle, right? So like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But that's also true in your brain and in your psychology and in your mindset. And, that's what I'm trying to do is lean into discomfort, get more comfortable with that and see where it leads me. And really apply that beyond physiology, like lean into hard, stressful conversations, for example, see what that will yield. especially if you go into them with the right set and setting and create safety and security, within conversations that you might otherwise avoid. It's like those stressful conversations that kind of stand between you and better relationships, and honestly stand between kind of where our society is and the one that we imagine as possible.
I feel like we just got a lecture at university just now.
Sorry. I missed my calling.
I know, like, you should have just gone to med school. Like that would have been so awesome. Look, I'm so grateful to know you. I'm so grateful for you. I've known you for a long time now. And I feel like every time you stumble on some sort of new teaching, like, we get to reap the benefit of it. So I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that you came on the show to talk to us about something so personal and something that a lot of people, I'm sure, can relate to, and to bring awareness to, paying attention to our stress and our bodies and not miss doctor's appointments. But that being said, I do just appreciate you so much. For everybody listening here, that wants to reach out to you or learn more, where can they go?
Sure. So I prowl the Serengeti of Instagram plenty, at Jeff Krasno. And I do have a course that is called Good Stress, that is launching on the Commune platform. And these are all the protocols of self-imposed good health conferring stress, some of which we talked about. And that's at onecommune.com. That's onecommune.com/good stress. And I talk to brilliant people like you on the Commune podcast. It's self-serving because that's how I learn. And if only out of my own vanity, I read a lot of books just to not embarrass myself when I'm talking to people smarter than me, which is basically every day. So I'm on the Commune podcast probably too many times per week. And those are my three places I hang my hat.
Okay, great. We will put all of those links in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, check out the info button. All of the links that Jeff mentioned will be there. So you can just click right through. Definitely check out that course if you're wanting to learn more about what we were talking about here today. I do have one final question for you. And the final question is, well, it has to do with the Radically Loved family, right? It has to do with the podcast. So, my intention was always to create a space where people can go and have these types of conversations. I kind of started with no direction, and then it just kind of became this thing. And the idea is that we are radically loved, supported by God, source, whatever higher power, some energy that keeps this universe together, works for us and not against us. So my question to you is, how do you feel radically loved?
Well, strangely, I find most of my deep, radically loved connection in chosen solitude. So I'm an extrovert in many cases, but I have really been able to deepen my feeling of connectivity. And that's kind of really more of a mystical idea, really, of feeling less like a separate self and feeling more interwoven into some sort of greater web of humanity. And the way that I generally find that is, ironically, kind of in moments of silence, of really deep forms of rigorous self-examination. You could call it meditation if you want. But that is where I sort of cross over and feel this sense of deep interconnectivity. And then, try to then move out of those periods of solitude and let that feeling punctuate the rest of my life. And I really feel as if that is what spirituality is, like rigorous self-examination, what that yields is sort of an erasure of this feeling that I am this locus of consciousness, like stuck in this bag of skin. And I'm not that. I'm actually completely mutually interdependent with everything around me. And when I feel that way, then it's characterized by compassion and empathetic joy, a sense, a feeling of loving kindness, a feeling of equipoise, this sensation that, someone else's suffering might be your own, or that you can truly, truly feel joy just only for someone else's joy. And that is the best gauge for me that I'm on some sort of good path.
I'm like, I want to insert a clap track there. Hold on. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here and for being a part of our community and for allowing us to be a part of yours. We're so happy that you got to share your story with us here today. And thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you back here soon. Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to the Radically Love podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. Also, don't forget to check out the Mindful Love Hub on Substack. This episode was produced by Tessa Tovar, music by DJ Taz Rashid.